Hey, everyone, and thanks for joining us on The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Kalil. On the show today, we have our sports analysts, Brian Friend and Patrick Clark, and they're discussing whether they think the Open is a good predictor for the games. It's a hot topic. I know Brian's smirking over there. He's done a lot of research. I just hope that Patrick can keep up today. What do you think?
Unlikely.
Thanks. A lot of confidence in me. I'm more of a feel it out type of person.
Well, you know what, Patrick? Just to keep things balanced, let's have you go first. Do you think that it's a good predictor for the games?
Okay, so it's kind of a weird. I think overall it is a good predictor of the games. However, there are some outliers, more so on the men's side than the women's side. I think on the women's side, you very rarely do you have these outliers where someone performs really well in the Open and then either bombs at the games or completely don't even make it to the games, whether it be through the regionals, sanctionals, or our current format with the semifinals. The one case of that kind of stands out to me is Martina Barbora. I think that's how you pronounce the name. In 2014, she finished 7th in the Open, and do you know who that is? Exactly.
I'm sure Brian does, but I do not.
2014. I think Brian was just starting CrossFit then, weren't you?
Actually, I did a Talking Elite Fitness episode about this topic called Open Studs Regional Duds or Busts. And we talked about her as one of the examples. Yeah, she was 7th in the Open that year. And she did okay at regionals. She got 10th. She had 3 finishes in the top 10 at the regionals that year, but she didn't make it through, and we never heard from her again.
Yeah. But that's like the one instance on the women's side that really stands out. Rarely ever see that anymore. I think, like I said, and Brian will obviously hit us with some data on that. But on the men's side, you see a lot more of those studs, and the one that comes to mind right off the bat is just last year. Travis Mead finished 3rd in the Open, and as far I don't know the exact story of what happened to him after that, but from my research, I don't even think he did the quarterfinals, and he kind of just fell off the face of the earth. So who knows? He might pop up again in this year's Open.
I actually spoke to Travis last spring after that, and I was curious about who he was and investigated a little bit about him. He's in the midst of doing 1 hero WOD per day for 365 days, and that's in addition to his regular training.
Mm-hmm.
How long has he been doing CrossFit for, Brian? Do you know?
A long time, and he's obviously has an incredible, tremendous capacity. This is not something I would recommend really for anyone, but he's chosen to undergo that task. He likes taking on very challenging tasks, apparently, but he's he's got a lot of stuff going on, and he chose not to compete any further in the season last year. So Patrick's right about that, and then that's pretty unusual to have someone do that well, 3rd place, which is one of the cashing spots of the Open, and where he's taking up some prize money, actually just completely forego the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think he won 7,500 for finishing 3rd, and he's a 4-time regional athlete, so he has that capacity. He's been to the regionals as an individual and on a team, I believe. So, but for him, and like he said, you've talked to him. He's like, I guess the games isn't one of those challenges he feels like he needs to put himself up against, and but there's other examples of that. I mean, you have someone like Lefteris. We all kind of know the story about him testing positive for performance enhancers, but that guy was an Open stud. But now, granted, we look back at it, and it's kind of tainted. He finished 3rd and 4th. 3rd in 2020 and 4th in 2019, and then he popped hot. So, and we can go down the list. Kyle Frankenfield finished 5th in 2016. Chase Smith's a guy. You probably have heard that name before, but he's been in the top 20 3 times in the Open. Finished 10th in 2017. But these are guys who've obviously have that work capacity or that fitness in the Open, but it doesn't translate into maybe live competition.
Brian, what are your thoughts? Do you think the Open is a good predictor for the games?
Yeah, I actually do, and I think it's surprising how good of a predictor it actually is when you look at it statistically. Because I regularly talk about the fact that I'm not that interested in how well someone who wants to try to position themselves to compete in an online competition to earn a qualifying spot to a live competition. I think that there's tremendous difference in those two formats because so many more variables are in your control online, when you're doing it online, and especially in the open when you have the opportunity to repeat workouts. There's not a specified floor layout usually. And what Patrick's saying is 100% true. Over the years, especially on the men's side, but occasionally on the women's side, there are athletes who pop up and have tremendous performances in the open and fizzle out in the next round or don't even compete in the next round. And in some cases, they just choose to compete on a team. I mean, even in the case of Jamie Green back when she won the Open. And so we're just not 100% sure how, good those performances actually are. But this year, going into the 2022 season, it's the second year of this newest format for the CrossFit Games season that we have. And so we can, I think that it was most relevant to just look at last year and then see, how did it play out open relative to games, and then in reverse, the games finishers, how did they do in the open as we're getting ready for the 2022 season. And outside of Travis Mead, there were only two other men who finished in the top 40 of the open who didn't make it to the semifinals. And one of them was Michael McKenna, who also chose not to compete in the quarterfinals. And the third was Cody Anderson, who missed by about 30 spots, making it to the semis. Of the guys who did make the semis, or I should say of the top 40 athletes just in general, on the men's side in the open, 17 of them went to the games as an individual. 2 of them competed on a team. And both of those team athletes actually podiumed at the games. It was Rich Froning and Lucas Hoyze from France, who is on CrossFit Genes. 10 of those athletes made it to last chance qualifier, which is actually, kind of an impressive statistic. And 8 of them were eliminated in the semifinals. But on the women's side, it was even more significant than that. So of the top 40 open finishers for the women, 24 competed at the games as individuals, 4 on teams, 2 as teenagers, and that's not counting Mal O'Brien and Emma Carey. That's 2 other teenagers. 4 in the last chance qualifier, 4 in the semis, and the only 2 who didn't compete at all in the quarterfinals were Caroline Reason-Thibault, who likely would have made the games if not injured, and Mandy Janowitz, who's just not competing really anymore.
That was a lot of stuff you just threw at us, huh?
Well, let me simplify it.
Yeah.
Basically, of the top 40 men and the top 40 women from the Open, half of them made it to the games as an individual last year. So that's a pretty impressive statistic for considering that the Open's only a 4 workouts over 3 weeks that everyone in the world is doing and can repeat if you want. And honestly, there's not that much incentive for the best athletes in the world to try to do top. It doesn't matter if they're top 40 in the world or not for the Open, unless you're striving to get one of the cash payouts, which is only for 5 athletes. Then all you have to do is make top 10%. Nevertheless, most of the games, or at least half of the games athletes, are also finishing in the top 40 of the Open. And that begs the question, well, what about the other half? So it turns out that for the men who eventually made the games, and for the women, there's some outliers in this field too. Like Annie Thorsdottir is a good example. Obviously, she did amazing at the games, but she was coming back from pregnancy, so she wasn't in peak condition for the Open. So she had one of the worst Open finishes. I think she was the 6th worst of all the women who made the games, and then she ends up taking 3rd at the games. Anyway, the average Open finish, including all the outliers for the men who made the games, is 83rd worldwide, and for the women is 61st worldwide.
Oh, I just made the cut.
And if you throw away some of the outliers, then it drops and gets a lot more impressive. But basically, if you take like the top 80%, so you drop the 8 lowest. And those could be, any number of reasons, like we said, from pregnancy, from maybe someone was sick or only did it one time, or it's even the case of some of the continents just aren't, the strongest. Like, Jason Smith is still dominating in Africa, but he's taking, relatively low Open placement compared to the rest of the games field. Anyway, the top 80% of the Open, of the games athletes in the Open, average of 40th place finish for the men and 29th for the women worldwide. So they're doing very, very well.
So Brian, an opinion on this is like you take an athlete like Anthony Davis, who finished, I believe, 3rd in the Open in, was it 5th
in 2017?
Yeah, 2017. Obviously made it to the games with Timberwolf CrossFit. but he's been trying to make it to the games as an individual, and he's been struggling, I guess, kind of struggling at that. I mean, there's obviously some holes. We've seen him in live competitions at Granite Games, and we've seen him at Wadapalooza. But an athlete like him who does so well in the Open, but yet, he has some talent. But how do you explain something like that? Is it just the Open workouts are just, particularly that season, tailor made for him, or?
Maybe. And, I think that maybe what I wouldn't want is that someone to go away from this conversation and say, well, if the Open is such a good predictor for the games, why don't we just send the top 40 from the Open to the games?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
that changes things a lot.
It does.
Well, that would, I think that if that was the case, and you can go back and look at, I guess, the 2019 season in particular, where people had a lot of incentive in the Open and see things a little differently. But that's actually where some of the problems start to emerge, is that it really, really, I think, disproportionately, emphasizes how important the programming becomes. And you have a workout like 19.1 that has just wall balls and rowing in it, and you have 100,000 men worldwide doing it, and suddenly someone like Noah Olson is left out. Yeah. Obviously, he shouldn't be left out, and we already know that even at the games, the best athletes in the world can have a bad workout. Well, in the Open, when there's only a couple workouts and there's a lot of people doing them, a bad workout's punished very differently. And so I think that the multiple step qualification process makes sense in that regard, because you can't test everything in an online setting that you should be testing to qualify a games field. And there's only a limited number of tests anyway, so you're going to miss something in a 4 or 5 test competition that needs to be, I think, explored. In the case of an Anthony Davis, if it's a little bit heavy and if it's not too long, he's pretty good. But as soon as you introduce some running or some 20-minute AMRAP, one of them in the Open usually every year, but depending on when it was, you could do okay. But if you suddenly have a 20-minute workout that's got repeating rounds of ring muscle ups or handstand push-ups or something like that, he's going to be more exposed.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, obviously the Open, it's a good test, but I think you have those outliers like Anthony Davis, Terrace, and then it also exposes people like Devin Ford, who we all know the story about Devin Ford, where the guys just. But that's another topic. But anyways, yeah. So I'd have to say.
So Patrick, what's your bottom line?
The bottom line is that it is a good test, but be prepared for outliers. Be prepared for people to kind of maybe, like a Travis Mead that comes in and does really well and kind of maybe upsets the balance a little bit. But at the end of the day, the hierarchy, the environment will be restored to its natural form, which means the best will be at the games.
Patrick, I love when you speak sometimes.
I'm so good with words.
Words are hard sometimes. Brian, what's your bottom line?
I think the bottom line is that, considering the drastic differences in the test, the format of the test, and the number of participants, it's pretty impressive how indicative performance in the Open is relative to the end of the season.
All right. Brian Friend, Patrick Clark, thank you for joining us for another episode of The Bottom Line, and we'll see you next time.